It's time for Brandon the Mac Attack, Jack. That's right. Joe Brandon came out today. He's having a pretty good day so far, I think. And in all of that good graciousness, he decided we have a new comprehensive proposal for a ceasefire. We're going to be talking about that right now.
And we're taking you live to the White House, where, as promised, President Biden is speaking now about the situation in the Middle East. Let's listen in.
I want to give an update on my efforts to end the crisis in Gaza. For the past several months, my negotiators of foreign policy, intelligence community, and like have been relentlessly focused.
His brain didn't kick in. I sped him up, so he sounds like normal.
Not just on a ceasefire that would inevitably be fragile and temporary, but on a durable end of the war. That's been the focus, a durable end of this war. One that brings all the hostages home, ensures Israel's security, creates a better day after in Gaza without Hamas in power. Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal. It's a roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages. This proposal has been transmitted by Qatar to Hamas. Today, I want to lay out its terms for the American citizens and for the world. This new proposal has three phases. The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. There are American hostages who would be released at this stage, and we want them home. Additional, some remains of hostages who have been killed would be returned to their families. Civilians would return to their homes. And
it's so crazy because the three-phase proposal, it might as well been written by Ismail Haniyeh, okay, by Yahya Sinwar, because it is almost identical. If you're a personal Brandon fan, you look at the situation and you say, this is relatively close, or this is a decent way to, at least in the short term, stop hostilities, when in fact, perhaps you would be shocked to find out Hamas proposes 3-stage 135-day truce and hostage deal leading to war's end. When was that suggested? Oh, that's right, the 7th of February. What does this mean? Was this a reasonable proposal when Hamas proposed it, but people refused to recognize that, but now they're saying that it is a reasonable proposal when Brandon proposes it? Are there also some other scary implications beyond it? Well, I think there are some other scary implications beyond it, but just like on the broadest terms, this is literally an identical proposal, very close to what Hamas has suggested time and time again. All right, let's continue though. Let's hear what he has to say.
In all areas of Gaza, including in the north, humanitarian assistance would surge, with 600 trucks carrying aid into Gaza every single day. With the ceasefire, that aid could be safely and effectively distributed.
By the way, I think part of the aid problem, I've been thinking about the pier a lot. I've been wondering, why would they try to rebuild the pier when the pier itself is bringing in no aid? And I think personally the reason why they built the pier was so that they could at least aesthetically claim something to counter the Leahy law, a law that dictates that no country in contravention of human rights laws will ever receive American weapons. Not letting in aid is such a direct violation of human rights law and an act of egregious collective punishment that even the Holocaust survivor dude who created the Human Rights Watch, he openly recognizes that he was wrong and has changed his mind on Israel's actions. Why? Because Israel is refusing to send in aid to Gaza, because that is a clear-cut definitional violation of international rights, human rights, okay? There is no other way to go around it, and that is a direct violation of the Leahy law in this country. But let's continue.
All who need it. During the 6 weeks of phase 1, Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase 2, which is a permanent end to hostilities. Now, I'll be straight with you. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase 1 to phase 2. Israel will want to make sure its interests are protected, but the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase 1, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue. In the United States, Egypt and Qatar would work to ensure negotiations keep going. All agreements, until all the agreements are reached and phase 2 is able to begin. Then phase 2 would be an exchange for the release of all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza, and as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments, a temporary ceasefire would become, in the words of the Israeli proposal, the cessation of hostilities permanently. End of quote. Cessation of hostilities.
It's crazy, man. It's verbatim the Hamas proposal all the way back in February. During the first 45-day phase, all Israeli women hostages, males under 19, the elderly and sick would be released in exchange for female and underage Palestinian security prisoners in Israeli jails. Israel would withdraw troops from the populated areas. Implementation of the second phase would not begin until the sides conclude indirect talks over the requirements needed to end the mutual military operations and return to complete calm. The second phase would include the release of the remaining male hostages and full Israeli withdrawal from all of Gaza. Bodies and remains would be exchanged during the third phase. By the end of the third phase, Hamas would expect the sides to have reached an agreement to an end to the war. The terror group, which governs Gaza, said in an addendum that the proposal sought to release 1,500 prisoners from Israeli jails, a third of whom it wanted to select from a list of Palestinians serving life sentences. The truce would also increase the flow of food trucks and other humanitarian aid to Gaza at a rate of no fewer than 500 trucks per day. If this deal that Biden's presenting to you seems familiar, it's because it's verbatim almost. Here's what Hamas said, by the way, after this deal. Hamas issued a statement saying it looks positively at what was included in President Biden's speech, mainly his call for a permanent ceasefire, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, reconstruction, and an exchange of prisoners. The movement affirms its position of readiness to deal positively and constructively with any proposal based on a permanent ceasefire, complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, reconstruction, and the return of the displaced to all their places of residence, and the completion of a serious prisoner exchange deal if the occupation declares its explicit commitment to that. So what happened in the time frame between February 7th or whatever and now? Well, thousands of more Palestinians were ruthlessly slaughtered. Hundreds of Palestinian homes were bombed into oblivion. Rafah happened. Hundreds of civilians in Rafah were mercilessly executed with American weapons. And during that time frame, domestic pressure increased, international pressure increased. The ICC openly came out with a court case against the war cabinet, or at least two prominent members of the war cabinet in Israel. Biden even suggested a red line that he never really enforced and lied about enforcing. So America coming out with this statement is pretty strong. It is kind of even stronger than the Biden red line, the Rafah red line, which he never really actually enforced at all. So one must ask, why is America coming out with this? For the most part, as far as we've seen, the Israeli government has said the exact opposite of said statement. So we'll see. Not, I guess, in general. There was a statement made from Bibi after Biden's speech. Biden's speech, Prime Minister says Israeli proposal would bring about Hamas's end and the release of all hostages. In a statement issued immediately after U.S. President Joe Biden's speech calling on Hamas to accept the latest hostage deal proposal and Israel's leader to stand behind it, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says the Israeli government is united in the desire to return our hostages as soon as possible and is working to achieve this goal. Except yesterday, the hostage families working negotiator, this is from yesterday, or well, I guess this morning, Israel won't end war for deal to free all hostages. Prime Minister's aide said to tell families. National Security Advisor HasanAbi says it will be possible to free female, elderly, and sick hostages in the coming months, but warns effort to release remainder unlikely to succeed. So why is National Security Advisor Zachi HasanAbi saying this moments before Benjamin Netanyahu says, oh yeah, we will actually release the hostages? The current government will not agree to end its war against Hamas in exchange for the release of all the remaining hostages held by the terror group, he said. The message, made during a heated meeting during which HasanAbi reportedly rebuked and insulted the relatives of several hostages, apparently calling them drama queens and yelling at them, appeared to be the first time a top Israeli official was quoted making such an admission. That's really interesting because their actions are, in my opinion, way more powerful than the supposed quotes that they would make directly to hostage families, because Benjamin Netanyahu can wear the fucking yellow ribbon that means, like, you know, release our hostages, bring them home all day, every day, but his actions say something entirely different. Let's get back to this Biden is Hamas guy.
Hostilities permanently. Finally, in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families. At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th. It's one of the Israelis' main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one. I know there are those in Israel who will not agree with this plan and will call for the war to continue indefinitely. Some are even in the government coalition. And they've made it clear they want to occupy Gaza. They want to keep fighting for years, and the hostages are not a priority to them. Well, I've urged the leadership in Israel to stand behind this deal, despite whatever pressure comes. And to the people of Israel, let me say this. As someone who's had a lifelong commitment to Israel, as the only American president who's ever gone to Israel in a time of war, as someone who just sent the U.S. forces to directly defend Israel when it was attacked by Iran, I ask you to take a step back and think what will happen if this moment is lost. We can't lose this moment. Indefinite war in pursuit of an unidentified notion of total victory will not bring Israel, will only bog down Israel and Gaza, draining the economic, military, and human resources, and furthering Israel.
He's been the most coherent in a while. Bro, it's because I sped him up. This is what he actually sounds like.
Isolation in the world. That will not bring hostages home. That will not not bring an enduring defeat of Hamas. That will not bring Israel lasting security. But a comprehensive approach that starts with this deal will bring hostages home and will lead to more secure Israel.
Bro, this proposal could have been addressed early October. What changed? What changed, Brandon? Now, the real question is, what will you do to follow through if Israel says f you to this? Which it seems like it probably will. That's the real question. You didn't enforce a red line in Rafah. What will you do to enforce this proposal? I think this will backfire on Israel again. Just like the red line. I've been covering this nonstop, super close. And one thing I've been trying to figure out is what changed in the eyes of the American public that white women started posting about all eyes on Rafah, even if it's a AI image. And I think it's partially because Biden mistakenly said, I have a red line on Rafah, which caused a lot of the Democrats to jump early and basically turn around and go, oh yeah, Biden is doing something. And then they even went forward with one ammunition deployment, stopping like one singular fucking ammo dump. So it caused people to go, oh wait, we can say no to Israel. Never mind. What I now think is that this additional move that Israel might violate again will cause even more people to get mad at Israel, because if Israel does what Israel does all the time, and they have stated that they have an intention of staying in Gaza until 2025, at least January 2025, I think if Israel follows along with that agenda of total victory, even more Barbaras and Deborahs are going to get involved and say, that's crazy. We're done. This is over. It's done. Israel does not understand the power that the Swifties have. I know it sounds stupid to say it like that, but it's something that I've brought up earlier in this conflict, in this genocide, which many yelled at me about. But I understand the power that white women hold. This motherfucking government is going after Ticketmaster. When's the last time they actually effectively prosecuted a monopoly, man? Are you kidding me? The only time that these guys actually work against capital is when the Swifties are on board. And now you got Swifties saying Taylor Swift say something about Gaza. I'm half joking when I say this. Pre-Rafah, pre-tent massacre, there was a lot of buildup, a lot of momentum, but it seemingly went nowhere. Post-Rafah, post-tent massacre, something legitimately changed. I say this as someone who only has the capacity to view this from, my own personal framework, my own personal perspective. Yeah, TikTok has been literally up Israel's for the past 8 months, so much so that Congress moved to ban it and openly stated, we're banning it because we can't control TikTok and the kids are pro-Hamas now. Student encampments didn't do it. The Flower Massacre didn't do it. The World Central Kitchen aid workers being killed didn't do it. So why did the Tent Massacre do it? That's my question. No matter how hard we try to mobilize grassroots, we still do not have a fraction of the influence that the government has and mainstream media has. It's as if they fire on all cylinders. When they make a statement, it's far more consequential. That's why I think Biden's change of pace, even remotely in the direction of seemingly punishing Israel or seemingly demanding Israel dial it back a little bit, caused this massive sea change. I think Biden said it, Rafah is the red line. People saw babies being slaughtered in Rafah and we're like, what the where's your red line now? Anyway, it doesn't really matter ultimately because things are really up regardless. But the only reason why I talked about this is because I think Biden coming out with this statement is massive as well. And I personally think that this, depending on how Israel moves from this point on, if Israel does what Israel has been doing, will cause its downfall completely, like utter destruction of the Israeli political apparatus in its entirety. If Israel follows through on the proposal, I mean, Netanyahu is over no matter what, but maybe they can return to like some semblance of liberal Zionism under Benny Gantz's leadership. That's it. That's my take.
President Biden has urged Hamas to accept a new Israeli proposal to free hostages and bring about a lasting ceasefire.
I like that this is from 12 hours ago, and in the time frame that this was, that this news article came out, Israel already said, nah, actually, it's our proposal, which it wasn't. It was the Hamas proposal. And no.
The conflict has put the US-Israel relationship under immense pressure, but in a surprise move, President Biden unveiled a new peace proposal and ceasefire offer from Israel.
I know there are those in Israel who will not agree with this plan and will call for the war to continue indefinitely. Some are even in the government coalition. And they've made it clear they want to occupy Gaza, they want to keep fighting for years, and the hostages are not a priority to them. Well, I've urged the leadership in Israel to stand behind this deal.
Brandon came out and said this is the Israeli proposal. One must ask the question why he said that. I suspect he said that because he wanted to be like, listen, this is good for you, Israel. We're going to start doing what we perceive is better for you so you don't get like cast away as a pariah state, and we're just going to lie and say that this was your proposal, even though it was the Hamas proposal. The other reason why I think that that they said this is Israel's proposal is because they want to pressure Israel. It is another, in my opinion, miscalculation. The miscalculation there being that Israel is not going to do what's best for them. Israel will probably, predictably, continue in the same way that they have so far, which is no proposal whatsoever. Now, the real question is, will the American media see this and report on it accurately? So far, they have not. The analysis is that he didn't want the reasonable proposal to be something Hamas had proposed because Hamas is supposed to be the peace-obstructing, peace-hating party. That narrative is now crumbling. I know. But if you've been actually paying attention, as many of you in here have been, you already know that Israel was the real obstacle to peace, so much so that you probably have a different opinion of the so-called peace process, negotiations that took place many decades prior, because the way that it was actually reported in the media and the way that is taught in our books is entirely different than the way things actually unfolded. You are watching reality unfold in front of your eyes in quite a dramatically different way, if not the exact inverse way, than the way it is being presented in the media. Unfortunately for Israel, and people are not just learning about this stuff from mainstream media, they are now seeing it with their own two eyes directly, from the casualties themselves, from the survivors themselves. This is precisely the reason why, even when the media reports on this stuff in the way that they normally do, most people go, that. Once again, Israel can no longer control the narrative, and the media has to respond to that outside pressure. If you're so aggressively doing propaganda when most of the people recognize you're doing propaganda, at that point, you're going to lose more and more people to independent media outlets and maybe even charlatans, right? Outside of the sphere of mainstream, just permanent contrarians, anti-vaxxers, hateful people, and that is genuinely damaging to public discourse in general, and it's genuinely damaging to mainstream media in general. So they have to at least maintain a level of impartiality. Now, having said that, an analog here can be seen with East Palestine, Ohio, ironically enough. If you guys recall, when the train derailment occurred in East Palestine, Ohio, and this massive cloud erupted, people were genuinely scared. They were filming it. They were talking about it. They were mostly talking about it on TikTok. And then the story became, why the is mainstream media not covering this? Which only forced mainstream media's hand to cover the story. Now, the reason why mainstream media had not covered that story prior is not just because they are obviously interested in protecting profits and corporations and whatnot, but also because, and I told you this at the time, 3 of those derailments to, different severity occur every single day in this country. And most people in media know this. So they're like, what? It's just another train derailment. Why the will we cover it? But they were forced to cover it because everyone was like, what the is going on? The reason why I'm explaining this example to you is because it is analogous to what's going on with Gaza. The media normally doesn't cover anything that Israel is doing, any of the atrocities that Israel commits on a regular basis with regular frequency. However, this time it became impossible to ignore. This time it became impossible to contextualize. This time there was other social media platforms where people could see with their own 2 eyes exactly the devastation, the death, and the destruction that Israel was dishing out to the Palestinian population. So that's why they are still ultimately going to run as much cover for Israel as physically possible, while trying to also retain a sense of impartiality over it that is needed for them to maintain their authority. These are 2 different motivations in direct contradiction with one another. If you accurately report on what going on, then you have to call it a genocide. But if you call it a genocide, then you're going against the other reason why you exist, which is to, of course, do the bidding of the American State Department. But if you do the bidding of the American State Department too much, then all of a sudden you've lost your authority, you've lost your credibility with an entire generation. And that is precisely what is happening here. That's why you see desperate calls to whitewash Israel's genocide with a little bit of decent news coverage sandwiched in between. But the real reason why the real coverage has to happen is so that in times of need, when push comes to shove and they have to literally do the propaganda necessary to correspond to American State Department interests, they have to have a sense of credibility. They have to have people trust mainstream news. When you lose that trust, then no one's going to listen to you when you report on it. The Iraq War was a major change of pace. A lot of the democratization of media that you see, a lot of the independent media that you see now, in that time frame, in the consent being manufactured for the war on terror, which was a $6 trillion project, and the failure of that all created a phenomenal opportunity for independent outlets to basically say, "No, this is bullshit." That also caused a lot of chaos, though. COVID was another moment where people further continued their distrust of mainstream outlets. And I think that we are now living in that universe where we are now living in the ashes of that, where unfortunately for our institutions that want to at least maintain some level of consistent messaging, sometimes that's good. During COVID, when people were talking about like best practices and bringing forward scientists and whatnot to speak on health initiatives, epidemiologists and the like that was a good thing. But people already mistrusted mainstream media so much and so dramatically, and there were so many outlets that kept talking about, well, the media lies to us. Look at the Iraq War. They could just point to that and point to many other instances where mainstream media had been caught trying to cultivate a narrative that people already had that inherent mistrust, and they no longer wanted to listen to what they were saying, especially in times when they were saying things like you have to stay at home. Regardless of the consent that mainstream media tries to manufacture, it's still very important for it to exist. It's incredibly important. Who else is going to do the journalism? It's not going to be me. I'm here serving you top of the hour ad breaks. New York Times writes, Netanyahu answers Biden's calls for truce by insisting on destruction of Hamas. Now, New York Times wrote this report showing Jabalia, the refugee camp of what remains of Jabalia in northern Gaza, and also saying like that the Israeli authorities are saying they're not going to do it because there's also aspects of the war cabinet. However, 28 minutes ago, Israel, according to Barak Ravid's reporting, confirms the Gaza hostage ceasefire deal proposal details laid out by Biden. So what does this mean? Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his aides are focusing on the aspects of a potential deal that are more favorable to Israel as the prime minister faces opposition to the proposal that could threaten the future of his coalition. Do you not believe any of the reporting that this proposal came from the Israel War Council this week? They said Bibi was on the losing side of the vote, which is why he's trying to kill it. Well, now apparently he's on the side that says yes to the vote. And yes, I do believe the reporting that the Israeli War Council was the one who suggested this. Except I also believe that Biden added the ceasefire and permanent end to hostilities aspect to the Israeli War Council's original three-phase program, because the Israeli War Council's ultimate goal was to maintain the occupation, or at least like stay in Gaza till, according to their own, according to the additional reporting on the matter, stay there until January, until after the election was over. I do believe that the American government added the ceasefire aspect to this specifically to trap Israel in a bind. I think that they recognize the domestic pressure on Biden's re-election chances, and more importantly than that, I think they recognize the international community's pressure placed upon Israel becoming a pariah state. If you recall, Hamas had said yes to a ceasefire proposal that was cut by Qatar and the CIA. Then additional news came out saying, oh, the Egyptian envoys actually changed the terms and negotiations of the proposal, and that's why Hamas said yes to it. Nobody knew. I don't believe that. I do believe what happened is that America cut a separate deal with Hamas saying, no, we're going to get these guys to back down. Just say yes to this, and we will cut this ceasefire and permanent end to hostilities bill. Just play ball with us. You are more likely to get reasonable outcomes from us than Israel. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, by the way, the two biggest psychos in the Netanyahu, not war cabinet, but like the Netanyahu government, are threatening to leave the government if the Biden ceasefire proposal is agreed upon by the Israeli war cabinet. It's just all over the place. Shortly after the Jewish Sabbath ended, Netanyahu's ultranationalist coalition partners, ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, issued statements attacking the Israeli proposal, which they heard about for the first time in Biden's speech. They said they told Netanyahu if this proposal goes through and turns into a deal, they will leave the coalition and topple the government. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid responded by issuing a statement committing to give Netanyahu a political safety net if needed in order to pass the deal. What are the consequences of them leaving the government? The consequences are major on Benjamin Netanyahu, who fears genuine prosecution, who was at the precipice of going to jail over corruption and bribery charges. So if the right-wing coalition that Benjamin Netanyahu has put forward in the current government, not just the war cabinet, but the current government, falls apart, then there has to be a re-election. And if that happens, Benjamin Netanyahu now has to go to left-leaning for Israel and centrist parties to be able to create a new government. Netanyahu won't agree to the hostage release deal unless it polls well for him, Israeli families say they were told. That's a nutty piece of reporting from NBC News. The Israeli government made a conscious and deliberate decision to sacrifice the hostages, the hostage family forum said. I mean, dude, if I'm the hostage families, I'm losing my mind on a way more frequent basis. They just keep yelling at these guys and saying that you're a hurdle against our broader goals of just like doing ethnic cleansing. Just shut the up, stop ruining the situation.
Well, with me now is Mohammed Taha from BBC Arabic to discuss this further. Mohammed, we've had proposals before. What's in this one and what's new?
It is an Israeli proposal. It does not include a permanent ceasefire. It does not include a full withdrawal from the Israeli forces from Gaza, which are the main two demands.
I don't understand this. Those are two direct words that Biden mentioned. Are my ears deceiving me? There is like a pretty easy to fucking read infographic that they put forward that had exactly those words on it. Is there something in the fine print of the proposal that directly contradicts the very clear cut text that declares a permanent cessation of hostility? Ryan Grimm has a take on it. There's a lot of manufactured confusion around these ceasefire proposals, but what happened is fairly simple. On 5/29, Israel's war cabinet approved an offer for a ceasefire that was transmitted to Hamas. Netanyahu only agreed to it under extreme pressure and over the opposition of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are not in the war cabinet. On 5/30, Hamas rejected it, saying no talks unless Israel stopped this assault. I remember I talked about this as well. This was one of the few instances where Hamas rejected the proposal, saying, no, you have to stop bombing us first. You have to stop bombing Rafah. Hamas is now rejecting Israel's proposal in an official statement. Okay, this was 2 days ago. Hamas now rejecting Israel's proposal in an official statement announcing first Israel will stop the war, then we will discuss a comprehensive prisoner exchange deal. Part of the political calculus here for Hamas was the recognition that the international community was going nutty mode over what Israel was doing. Now, of course, there's two ways out of this. One mind says, oh, wow, how disingenuous of Hamas to rely on Israel's inhumanity here. The second question would still be, hello, Israel has every opportunity not to behave like animals and just stop bombing. And yet, for some weird reason, unbeknownst to me, we are just still operating like Israel is not a political entity comprised of human beings, but instead is just simply a natural disaster. On 5/31, Biden grabbed the Israeli proposal, which Netanyahu had been happy to see rejected by Hamas, and made it fully public, cleverly but accurately calling it the Israeli proposal, which it is. But Netanyahu hates it. So now Netanyahu is walking back from it while Hamas is responding positively. Now the mediators in U.S., Qatar, and Egypt are putting pressure on both Israel and Hamas to accept the deal. However, there's an issue here. The issue is the confusion isn't stemming, in my opinion, from whether this was an Israeli proposal or whether this was a Hamas proposal. The condition is stemming from the fine print. The Israeli side, on the one hand, depending on how far right they are, is presenting this as a permanent end to the war, and that's devastating for their goals of doing full-blown ethnic cleansing. The other side, on the Israeli political war cabinet, that's still pretty far right, like the Bibis, are trying to play fast and loose and claiming, no, we can still keep bombing. No, you don't understand. We can still keep bombing. I promise we'll keep bombing even after we get all the hostages. That is the key consideration here. Is this a real effort to create a permanent ceasefire and also bring about the release of hostages from the Israeli prisons and also on the Palestinian side in Gaza? Or is it simply a way for America to run political cover for Israel once again to say, hey, here are the conditions of the deal. It's called Israel gets to bomb you after they take all the hostages out. Logistically speaking, there's no other way of extracting hostages without a cessation of hostilities, at least in the short term anyway. You literally cannot take the hostages out without Israel stopping its bombing campaign, regardless. So that has to happen regardless if you want to take the hostages out. On 5/31, Biden crabbed the Israeli proposal. Now the mediators in U.S., Qatar, and Egypt are putting pressure on both Israel and Hamas to accept the deal. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the far-right members, said they'll leave the government if the deal happens. That'll leave Netanyahu to form a government with center-right figures. And as you saw, this is the proposal laid out by Biden: a complete ceasefire, a permanent end to hostilities, a complete ceasefire, and a permanent end to hostilities. Here's Netanyahu subtly acknowledging he did make the proposal, but that he doesn't really mean it because he'll keep waging war no matter what. Note the language. The prime minister authorized a negotiating team to present a proposal to that end, which would also enable Israel to continue the war until all of its objectives are achieved, including the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities. Does that seem to be in any of the fine print on the Biden mentions? More confirmation this is Israel's offer. Senior Israeli official tells me the plan presented by President Biden is indeed the offer we made by the war cabinet. They're the mediators to Hamas. However, there's one major difference between President Biden's speech and the actual offer made by Israel. Israel has never agreed that negotiations between stage 1 and stage 2 can continue indefinitely, and during that time, the ceasefire lasts. This might mean that Hamas can keep the hostages that were not freed and continue to negotiate forever, thus achieving the end of the war while still holding on to the hostages. The attached quote from President's speech is what they are referring to. But again, the main point is that they confirm it's an Israeli proposal. Now, people are not very smart, as I like to repeat over and over and over again. And that, in this circumstance, is a benefit for us, those who enjoy peace, those who want a cessation of hostilities, and those who want Palestine to be free. What do I mean by this? Because this is pretty black and white, something that people can sink their teeth into, something that people can understand. They see a complete ceasefire, they think a complete ceasefire. They think a permanent end to hostilities. They see that, they read that, they internalize that, they say, oh, Biden finally woke up. He's finally trying to do some fucking real presidential shit. He's finally trying to respond to Israel's cruelty and brutality. Israel trying to play fast and loose with the definitions of a permanent end to hostilities and saying, well, while the hostage negotiation process is still working, we will still continue to bomb because, we're going to say we need 100 hostages released. And we know full well that there aren't 100 alive hostages, let's say, for example, right? That means we can keep bombing you. They don't realize that if they do that, that looks exactly like the Brandon Rafah red line saga. Brandon says there's a red line on Rafah. Israel violates that red line in a very public way. All of a sudden, everyone's looking at the situation and going, holy shit. Israel is bloodthirsty. Israel just violated the red line because their thirst for baby murder cannot be satiated.
Are we anywhere closer to a ceasefire after what happened yesterday?
That's what we're trying to figure out right now. The bad part about this situation, obviously, is the fact that Israel is trying to play fast and loose with certain terms like ceasefire by saying, oh, we're negotiating the ceasefire, right? They are using this as an opportunity to be like, no, we can keep blowing up Palestinian babies. Here are the conditions as to how we can do that. So for them, they think they can have this semantics game that they're playing and have the world look the other way. And many outlets will do that, except this is no longer 2014. We are in 2024. People were stupid in 2014 as well and didn't really pay attention. But now people are still stupid, but they're at least paying attention. I think that Biden stressing complete ceasefire and permanent end to hostilities here goes against the wishes of Israel. I think him featuring those statements instead of doing this wishy-washy Israeli proposal thing where it's like, and there will be a negotiation process and maybe Israel will keep blowing people up, but who knows? Like, instead of saying that, he's just saying ceasefire, permanent end to hostilities. That is, in my opinion, a way to pressure the Israeli war cabinet and a way to pressure Israel in general. Really hoping isn't doing a waiting game until after the election, since once Biden's out, Israel will get all the aid they want coming from Trump. Brother, I hate to report on this in a way that will make you sad, potentially. But once the elections are over, Biden, if he wins, will also give Israel all the aid on the planet. The elections are one of the only ways of trying to add a little bit of additional pressure to the administration, because if you threaten their re-election chances, maybe they'll act differently. But once the election's over, it's no holds barred for both Brandon and for Trump. Then what is the exit ramp for a genocide? All realistic paths point to an endless ethnic cleansing campaign? No. I mean, there's currently a bunch of of international organs of justice working against Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign. All of these are creating additional mechanisms of pressure, not only placed upon the state of Israel, but also placed upon the United States. The United States cannot maintain its unconditional support to Israel with the entire rule-based international order crumbling before its eyes. Remember what I just said earlier about how mainstream media has to maintain a presence of like credibility and impartiality in an effort to continue making propaganda that aligns with State Department interests in times of need, and therefore they'll sometimes offer like real news coverage, or they'll basically give you like a news story. They'll feed it to you a little bit for you to go, wow, the New York Times is even saying this. That's crazy. That very same interest exists for America. America needs the rule-based international order to continue because America is leading the rule-based international order. That is a very effective soft power mechanism that reasserts American hegemonic power status unconditionally. So without that, if that falls apart, America loses one major power tool that it has at its disposal. You can use it against Russia. You can use it against foreign actors that you declare to be enemies all the fucking time, but you can't use it if the ICJ and the ICC and all of these other instruments of international order, the UN, is so consistently and in a way that is broadly defiant of American interests, routinely repeating the notion that America's unconditional support for Israel is unjustifiable. This destroys the dog and pony show. They need to maintain that so they can maintain their dominance, and they will slowly but surely be forced to reckon with the reality that they cannot maintain it while also supporting, facilitating, and offering endless political cover to Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign, because Israel keeps openly posturing against the United States of America while still getting unlimited support from the United States of America. Support in the form of, as we've seen, political cover at the UN with the Security Council vetoes that America routinely uses to defend Israel against the rest of the international community, and the political cover that it offers to Israel by openly sanctioning ICC prosecutors like Bensouda that we covered before at the behest of Israel. What if they choose Israel over global soft power? That's insane, because then it's over. Either way, it's over. It's either over for Israel in the long run, as it's interested in maintaining its apartheid in the current structures, in the current boundaries that it maintains its apartheid in, or it's over for the United States of America. It's over for international cooperation. I mean, that's way more devastating.